Hi everyone. I wanted to provide you all with a short little presentation as we are approaching the point where you're looking at your program, second part of the program evaluation, and ultimately your final product at the end of the semester. So just as a reminder, yes, the idea that you have for the counseling program evaluation is ideally the one that you've been working with throughout the semester. So on the discussion post where you've been doing literature reviews, where you have thought about types of assessments you might use, populations you might be looking at, the logic model, the objectives, the goals, statements, all of that information basically can just be revamped and put into the program evaluation, the counseling program evaluation. So make sure that you're going through in the discussion post specifically and your blog entries for those of you that did those, looking at my comments and feedback and making any kind of adjustments as needed so that you are providing a really good quality rough draft. No, this is not a research project as you might think of a research project. What you're doing is you're presenting a counseling program that you have support for the need of it because of the literature that you reviewed. You found, yep, there's a problem out there that's going on in the world. It can be resolved through some type of counseling intervention. Here's the intervention. Here's the population I'm looking at. And then the evaluation part of it is to see if the intervention is working. And so that's the big difference here between a research project, which is in hindsight. So a research project, you do the research, you conduct it, you stop it, and you go back through and you look at the statistics of it. A program evaluation is different in that you're looking at the program as a whole, and you're reporting to stakeholders, people that actually care about this issue and the topic, and you're figuring out how well it works. Was it working for you? Was it working for the population? Did you reach the outcomes you would hope to reach? So it's a little bit different, but it can be a bit confusing. But just remember, you're looking at the actual program itself, the interventions that you've suggested. Everything is hypothetical. You're making up a program, basically. I mean, there might be a couple of you out there that are looking at, that are currently working in the field, and you're revamping some programs that are currently going on at your place of employment, and that's fine. But even with those, it's all hypothetical, right? Because you're not actually conducting this evaluation of a counseling program. You're presenting a potential program and you're thinking of it as if it's a real program, but it's all hypothetical. So I provided for you the rubric. I absolutely encourage you to look at the rubric because that's what I grade off of. I leave little to the imagination in terms of what I'm looking for whenever that final paper is turned in at the end of the semester. So I very specifically want you, if you want all full points in these full points in the areas of the rubric, you have to have the right number of references. They have to be from peer-reviewed journal articles. They have to be relevant to counseling and to the program that you presented. You have to have the logic model. You have to have a certain number of objectives, and everything's got to be in APA format. So I encourage you to look at the rubric that I provided, start framing your paper around that, look at the outline that I provided, which is just an outline, meaning that your paper is a developed paper, that looks more like a term paper, if you will. You're not providing me with the outline, rather you're actually doing the paper itself. But so a combination of the headings, if you will, I mean, you can use those headings in the outline that I provided. It's a great way to structure the paper. And so you can use the outline, use the headings, and then develop your paper from that. The logic model, so moving on to slide 3 with the logic model, remember this is just presented in graphic format, okay? So it's not that you're typing everything out in paragraph format with the logic model. I really just want the graphic representation of the inputs, the activities, and the outputs. It can be very simplistic here. So that needs to be included. Yeah, I know it takes up a little bit of space. If you have additional figures, additional items, if you're really, really limited on space, my suggestion is to create an appendix and stick all of the pretty little pictures that you might have in the appendix so that you save some room on the paper. Because remember, I don't need this to be a 10 to 14 page paper. I don't want that at the end of the semester, and I'm sure you all don't feel like you really want to write that long of a paper either. And so we're trying to condense all this information as much as possible. You have the logic model first, you're developing your narrative afterwards, and we did all this in the discussion board, so hopefully, I mean, you can just use a lot of what you already presented in your discussion post for the paper itself. And then the objectives come after the narrative, right? So the narrative basically is a short explanation, one paragraph of what is in the logic model, and then your specific objectives follow the narrative, okay? Now this is bringing me to the more important point of the objectives, and what in the world do I mean by objectives? So objectives differ from goals, okay? And the goal differs a little bit from the purpose of your actual program. So objectives are very specific, okay? The more specific that you can get with your objectives, ultimately the better. The goals are generalized. You know, the overall goal of your program may be to decrease stress reactions in children that are fearful of dogs. Okay, I'm just being pretty general here. Okay, that's a long-term goal, a long-term type outcome, very generalized, not specific at all. Objectives are very specific, and they are specific to the program, okay? The program that you're evaluating, the intervention, I should say. They're specific to the intervention that you're proposing within this project. So it's not the objective for the need, right? You already got that through your needs assessment, through your literature review. You get that there's a need for this program to be there. Your objectives are related to the intervention itself. What I mean by the SMART format, okay, is that objectives are following the SMART format. Not that your program is following the SMART format, but the objectives themselves are following the SMART format. And hopefully within these slides I provided you with a nice little way to conceptualize the development of objectives, but I do encourage you to go back and look at the modules where we talked about program evaluation. I'm trying to think of which one this would have been, probably module 6, potentially module 7. Go back and look at the resources that I provided on objective development, on terminology that's used in the development of objectives. But basically, you want them to be simple, concrete to a degree, right? You want to be able to say to your stakeholders for the program evaluation, this is the objective of the intervention. This is what I expect will be the outcome after I've provided this intervention to this specific population of people, okay? So they're simple, they're measurable. That's very important because at the end, the only way to know if you've reached your objective is to go back and see if what you've measured has changed. You know, you have to have some type of measurement there. It has to be attainable and achievable, meaning that it's got to, be very specific to the population, to the intervention you're providing, relatively short term because it's got to be attainable and achievable within a short term. Realistic means, you're not shooting for a pie in the sky here, that you're really just kind of concentrating on one singular activity or behavior change within your client population and focusing in on that. And the time frame has got to be included here. And when we're thinking about program evaluation, we're not thinking about a longitudinal study typically, okay? So we're talking about a short-term type thing. You're putting some type of intervention into place where you're providing counseling and education to a small group of people for a 6-month period of time, maybe a 9-month period of time. And maybe a long-term goal is that you're going to be looking at the effects of the program 5, 10 years, 15 years down the road. But the objective for the actual program is the objective, the short-term objective, right? So looking at slide 5 here, I'm kind of like jumping all over. Okay, so I gave an example of what an objective for a program might look like, but the example here on slide 5, this is basically what it should look like when you're writing your paper, okay? Objectives for my program are, 1, 2, and 3. Participants will. So you can word them a little bit differently, of course, but they're supposed to be maybe a sentence or two. Ideally, objectives are just one sentence that provides all the information you need to know about that particular objective in that one sentence. And so looking at slide 6 and the actual writing process of it, I hope this little graphic will help you frame how to develop an objective. Remember, you got to have 3 of them to get the full points, and they all have to follow this kind of format. Including a name, the action word, what's happening, when is it happening, how are you measuring any kind of change. When you add up all of those things and put it into one nice little neat sentence, you're going to get one objective for your program evaluation project, okay? Now, kind of another little insight into why this is so important, okay? Objectives in order to be an effective counselor, you have to know how to write an objective, and you have to know how to write an objective correctly. Why is that important? Because you're going to be writing treatment plans, and what is included in a treatment plan? Goals and objectives. And what happens when you have an objective for a client that is really, really broad, not concrete at all? Well, then it becomes really hard to measure any change in your clients. And that becomes problematic for you as the clinician, because when you're going back and seeing, oh man, did this make a difference for my clients? It's really hard to tell if you don't have an objective that was, short-term, realistic, attainable, following that SMART format, right? Becomes even more so problematic for your supervisors who want to see that you know what you're doing and that you're doing a good job at it. It becomes even more so problematic when you need to report things to insurance companies for billing purposes, because insurance companies have to know that the interventions that you're providing to your clients are working, are making a change, and that you're basically justifying payment for the service, okay? So that's kind of the long-term purpose of us focusing on objectives so much. A more short-term purpose is that when you get to your group counseling class, spoiler alert, this is something that Dr. Glenn is going to be looking at in her final project for you all. And so it's better for me to give you the feedback and guidance now so that you're not getting all the red marks on your paper, so to say, the last semester, right when you're ready to graduate and you're immersed in your internship experience. So that's why it's really important that we're looking at development of objectives right now, and that I'm being pretty critical about it. And so, when it comes to evaluating this as part of this project and looking at the rubric, just know that I'm trying to give you as much feedback as I can. For some of you, I've given examples of how to write your objectives in a different way. So I do absolutely encourage you to follow that guidance. It'll help you out in the long run, I promise. So looking at slide 7, I've given you an example of what this equation could look like in real life, right? So here we've got our client, potentially, Jill, her name. We've got the actual action word. What is she doing? She's reporting. That's an action word. What is she reporting? Suicidal ideation. When is she doing it? For 3 consecutive weeks, right? That's the end goal of this, that she's reporting no suicidal ideation for 3 consecutive weeks as part of her counseling process. How are we measuring this? Specifically with the Beck scale for suicidal ideation. And so when we put all of that together in one simple sentence, we've got an objective. Jill will report no suicidal ideation for 3 consecutive weeks on the Beck scale for suicide ideation. So looking at kind of the next steps in part 2 of your counseling program evaluation project, now we're going to be focusing on the evaluation design, the project design, the program design, I should say. What is the evaluative process? What will it look like? Some of you have touched on this in the needs assessment part of it, so you can cut and paste, you can move things around, you can expand on what you've already talked about in part 1 within part 2. So you really want to think of the type of design. So this goes back to, are we doing an experimental design? Are you thinking that you would look at your data collection by using surveys or some type of instrument or an assessment or observation? Is this a case study? How are you going to analyze the data afterwards? So remember, this is all hypothetical. I am not asking you to actually conduct any type of research or analysis. I am not expecting you to give me fake numbers. I don't want that or need it. But I want you to do, what I do want you to do is look at the text and think, really, if you were running this program and you were providing some type of counseling intervention to change a behavior for the participants, how are you going to, what are you going to do with all the data that comes from that? So if you're thinking about the data collection piece of it, and I've put this all in the outline too, and the instruments that you might use, there are specific counseling related assessments that are already developed that I want you to look into to see if there's something that matches up with the program that you are proposing. So you can look at the Mental Measurements Yearbook, which you can find on WVU's library website, and I've also put an article measuring rehabilitation outcomes on within this module for you that provides a really a good number of potential assessments that can be used in rehabilitation counseling, mental health counseling, both that might be appropriate for some of your projects. So look at those first, I would say, because what I do want you to do is report on reliability and validity, and a lot of these assessments that are out there and available for use, like all the Beck ones, for example, they've been run through the reliability and validity tests to the nth degree, and so you can just report that that has been done. If you are thinking that there's nothing out there that fits your need and you have to develop an assessment or design a survey, remember, simple is best. Keep it simple. Give me some examples of the questions you might be asking, but, don't make it overly complicated for yourself. And again, when it comes to the data analysis piece of it, I just want you to be thinking, what do you think you would do with the data? What have other people in similar that have run similar programs in the past, go back to the literature review, what have they done with their data, how have they collected it, what have they done to analyze it later on, how have they disseminated it, things of that nature, what I'm really looking for with the last piece of like the data analysis and the conclusion, okay? Again, no need to create actual data, no need to make up numbers for me, no need to think about SPSS or Excel or anything like that. So we're not getting too in-depth with that aspect of it. So hopefully that provides you guys with a little bit more clarification as we go into the second part of the counseling program evaluation project. Everything's posted in the module for submitting the part 2 of the project. If you have any questions, please put them on the questions for Dr. Simpson page. If you have questions, just ask. I'll make sure, I didn't do as good of a job looking at those questions prior to part 1 submission, but I will make sure to get in there periodically throughout the rest of the week to make sure that I'm answering all your questions before you need to submit the paper itself. So with that, I'll leave you all to your writing.